The Kremlin stated on Thursday that it did not foresee any possibility of China mediating in the Ukraine conflict. Additionally, they confirmed that they had no other choice but to continue with their offensive. This statement came on the same day that French President Emmanuel Macron was in Beijing to convince China not to support Moscow's campaign. Dmitry Peskov, a Kremlin spokesman, acknowledged China's potential for mediation, but described the situation with Ukraine as complex. According to Peskov, there were no prospects for a political settlement at the moment. Macron had asked Chinese leader Xi Jinping to bring Russia to its senses. Xi had visited Moscow the previous month and had presented a united front with Russian President Vladimir Putin against the West. China has presented a proposal for peace in Ukraine, but the United States has dismissed it, seeing it as giving Russia the opportunity to keep territories it has seized. China has been neutral officially on Ukraine, but Xi has not criticized the Russian offensive nor spoken to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Peskov reiterated that there was no other way for them except to continue with their special military operation. The operation is the Kremlin's term for their offensive in Ukraine. Putin met with the leaders of 4 Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, that he claimed to have annexed despite never fully controlling. Putin's goal is to push Ukraine's forces back to a distance where they will not be able to inflict any damage on Russia. Putin made this statement during televised talks that resembled his usual meetings with the heads of Russian regions. During the talks, the leaders discussed snowfall, gas distribution, and vegetable storage, with hardly any mention of the armed conflict. The United States has expressed concern about Russia's buildup of troops near Ukraine's border. The White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, said that Russia's military activities were reckless escalation of the situation. The U.S. State Department spokesperson, Ned Price, called on Russia to de-escalate the situation and to respect Ukraine's territorial integrity. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg expressed concern about the situation in Ukraine and condemned Russia's military buildup. Stoltenberg called on Russia to de-escalate the situation, respect Ukraine's sovereignty, and engage in constructive dialogue. The European Union, EU, expressed its full support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The EU called on Russia to immediately halt its military activities, withdraw its troops, and respect Ukraine's sovereignty. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has accused Russia of aggression and called on the international community to support Ukraine. Zelensky has also appealed to NATO for membership, saying that it is the only way to ensure Ukraine's security. The Ukrainian government has declared martial law in certain regions, and has called up reservists to strengthen its armed forces. The UN Security Council has held several meetings to discuss the situation in Ukraine. The Council has expressed concern about the escalation of violence and has called for an immediate end to the fighting. The OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has been monitoring the situation in Ukraine since 2014. The OSCE has reported ceasefire violations and human rights abuses in the conflict zone. The OSCE has called for an immediate end to the fighting and for the implementation of the Minsk agreements, which are aimed at ending the conflict. The Minsk agreements were signed in 2015 by Ukraine, Russia, and separatist leaders from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The agreements include provisions for a ceasefire, the withdrawal of heavy weapons, and the holding of local elections in the separatist-held areas. However, the agreements have not been fully implemented, and the conflict has continued to simmer. The conflict in Ukraine began in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Since then, fighting has erupted between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The conflict has claimed more than 13,000 lives and has displaced over 1.5 million people. The international community has condemned Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support for the separatists in eastern Ukraine. Sanctions have been imposed on Russia by the United States, the EU, and other countries. The conflict in Ukraine remains a major source of tension between Russia and the West. The Kremlin has accused the United States and its allies of supporting Ukraine's efforts to join NATO and of interfering in Russia's internal affairs. The United States and its allies have denied these allegations and have called on Russia to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe.